Hello and welcome to a new video. Today, unlike the previous Ramble videos I've done, this one will have some footage from various Team Fortress 2 gameplays. I think this will be a little bit more interesting to watch, at least in the background, while I just drone on and on about shit that doesn't matter. At least it'll be more interesting than a still picture that I normally use. And so let's get on with it with this dumb little, I suppose you can think of it as a podcast more or less. I've been thinking a bit about the Star Wars sequels. Episode 9 is supposed to eventually come out. I don't think it's been officially announced yet, but it eventually will be, and we'll get the conclusion to the sequels to the original trilogy that has had so much division among fans of Star Wars. And Episode 8 especially is seen as extremely low quality by Star Wars fans. And the big problem with them is that unlike, say, the prequels, which has been, severely memed, so people can appreciate a little bit of stuff from them, like have a little bit of a laugh about some of the especially silly writing or scenes from them. The sequels have just led to disdain and disinterest. They just aren't good. There's so many problems with them that you just wonder, how exactly did this stuff get greenlit? And one of the biggest problems with the sequels is that they hinge heavily off of the original trilogy. Despite being new adventures and new stories, they can never quite escape the original trilogy, the films that George Lucas made. And that has led to some of the worst aspects of the sequels, because a lot of what you see in the sequels and their connection to the original trilogy just comes off as severely disrespectful to the original trilogy. Now, when you think of the original trilogy, some of the biggest things to think about are the characters. The original trilogy has iconic names and faces that'll endure throughout cinematic history. Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, R2-D2, C-3PO, Darth Vader, and Chewbacca. I think those are the absolute, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, I would say, a bit to a lesser extent. But the other ones I've mentioned are like the absolute core of the original trilogy, the ones who have been represented throughout all of the movies. Actually, all of them have been in every single original trilogy film, which is why I think they represented far more than, say, Yoda or Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, this isn't to say that other original trilogy characters haven't been shat on in the sequels. Yoda can now apparently produce lightning as a Force ghost, which begs the question, why did no Force ghost use that in the first place? Why, rather than sending in all these X-Wings to fight the Death Star, did they not just have Obi-Wan Kenobi Force ghost his way by that exhaust port and space lightning strike the hole in it and cause that chain reaction and all so and such? But concerning the characters I think most represent the original trilogy, they have been downgraded, they have been bastardized, they have been thrown in for the sake of just throwing them in. Chewbacca, for example, has become a sideshow for porgs, those little cat slash penguins slash whatever birds that were in the island Luke Skywalker was holed out on. And that's about it. And I guess one of the most telling things about Chewbacca just being cast aside in the sequels is actually in episode 7, where Rey and Chewbacca return from the Starkiller base, and Han Solo has just died, and Leia is aware of this because she has like a Force connection to him or something. And she goes up and she hugs Rey. Not Chewbacca, not the character who has lived with Han Solo for longer than Leia even knew him. She hugs Rey, the character who didn't even know the Force existed. A character she hasn't even met, as far as I remember, actually. Like, actually, legitimately don't remember. Did Rey and Leia meet before that moment? And if they did, it likely wasn't substantial. Certainly not as substantial as the relationship she must have built with Chewbacca over the years. But because Rey is the main character, they couldn't possibly figure out a way to, like, give Chewbacca a moment with Leia. It's not like they could have extended the movie by like a few minutes in order to have a scene commemorating Chewbacca's relationship with Han Solo, and the same thing happened in The Last Jedi, where Luke Skywalker found out Han Solo died and Chewbacca was right near him, and they weren't allowed to have a moment either. It was just, I guess fuck you, Chewbacca, you walking carpet. We're not gonna see you grieve over the death of your best friend in the whole fucking galaxy. R2-D2 was more or less thrown in these films as well. Like, he had a bit of a moment at the end of episode 7 when he displayed that missing map piece, which makes zero fucking sense. Like, if R2-D2 was with Luke Skywalker and then went away from Luke Skywalker, that would mean that someone had to take him away from Luke Skywalker. He would have to have a way to get from with Luke to away from Luke. So why wasn't that investigated or pursued when Luke Skywalker went missing? And more so, why didn't they just activate him and ask him what's going on? Like, he was with Luke Skywalker when his attempt at training new Jedis went to shit. So for absolute decades, was he just sitting in the corner of this one room in sleeper mode, and no one thought to turn a mask and say, "Hey R2, what's going on with Luke Skywalker here? What did you see?" Like, was he programmed to be that way? In which case, is there no way to override that programming? It just seems kind of strange that he sort of played this little Deus Ex Machina where they couldn't figure out how to fill in the missing piece of the map, and so they said, "Oh, it's in R2-D2 the whole time." And where was R2-D2? Oh, he was just sitting in a corner collecting dust. Fucking wonderful. It was actually like my favorite character from the original trilogy, so it's just kind of crappy to see him like this. But at least he wasn't the most disrespected. He actually had a pretty nice moment with Luke Skywalker in episode 8 when he showed Luke Skywalker the original recording of Princess Leia that initially spurred him into action to try to save her, and ultimately led to him finding Obi-Wan and learning about the Force and becoming a Jedi, and, well, the rest is history. Cinematic history, far more relevant than the sequels, but history nonetheless. And wasn't ruined by a shitty joke. It wasn't ruined by an attempt to subvert expectations the the worst bloody thing about it was that Luke Skywalker implied that R2-D2 swore, but at that point, it's like, I'll take it. And actually, just going off from that, going back to Chewbacca, I find kind of funny that in Episode 8, Chewbacca tries talking to Luke, and then Rey tries to translate him. Like, I understand that Chewbacca doesn't speak English, and therefore someone needs to react to what he says or outright reiterate what he says so that the audience can have an idea of what he said. But it could have been handled a lot better than having what's essentially still a nobody translate this character to Luke Skywalker, a character that he has known for decades now and is perfectly able to understand. Anyways, C-3PO wasn't used all that much, but out of all the original trilogy characters, that's the one I'm a bit least offended by, at least upset by, I guess you can say. It would have been nice if he tagged along and was the one to maybe translate what Chewbacca said to Rey and have a conversation with Luke, since he was one of the droids that Luke Skywalker picked out. But it's not all that upsetting that was just sort of there for the sake of being there, as far as I'm concerned. And I guess a part of it is because his character wasn't really ruined or utilized incorrectly. There wasn't an attempt at, making a darker, grittier, more depressing version of him. It was just the same C-3PO we've all known and enjoyed throughout the Star Wars series. But either way, he was still just sort of there. Han Solo is a very different thing, though. Han Solo was a character who has gone through quite a bit of development over the original trilogy, and yet in these sequels he has sort of regressed. Not sort of regressed, he has outright regressed. He has gone from like a hero of the rebellion or the Republic or whatever, helping take down the Empire, being integral to the first battle of the Death Star, he saved Luke on Hoth, he was captured in Cloud City, he helped take down the second Death Star's generator shield or whatever. Like, he was there about as long as Luke Skywalker was, and yet despite all he has done and all the recognition he should have throughout the galaxy, it has only, after all, been like 30 years. He has completely regressed to the state he was at the start of A New Hope, where he's this low-level smuggler getting in trouble with other smugglers and crime lords, and generally just being a low-life scoundrel. How exactly did he get to this state? Why wasn't he pursuing anything larger? How has he seemed to, lost any skills he's gained throughout his adventures? Like, he seemed ridiculously weak and unable in Episode 7. He had one accidental cool shot against one of the stormtroopers, but that's about it. And it's just really sort of crappy because you almost wish you absolutely wish he wasn't in these new movies, that these films took place 200 years after the original trilogy, and no one but R2-D2 and C-3PO have lived long enough to see what has become of the galaxy. 200 years seems like a much more reasonable time to undo what the original trilogy heroes have done. It seems like a reasonable amount of time for an empire to rise up, for the Jedi to fall, for the Force to constantly fluctuate and try to rebalance itself between light and dark. But just placing it 30 years after the original trilogy, and after all these characters have done, basically makes everything they've done seem pointless. And another really crappy thing that sort of bridges the gap between Han Solo and Leia is that the romance they've built up between Han and Leia has completely dissipated and petered off into disdain for each other, that they can just sort of barely stand to be in the same room as each other. Now granted, that's more accurate with most romances and marriages and not, but if the proponents are able to excuse this film by saying, well, it's a fantasy space movie about wizards wielding light swords, you shouldn't be worried about the realism, then I'm gonna place my cards here and say they should not have gone with this route, and they should have had a perfectly reasonable romance despite what happened to their kid. Because, you know, it's a fantasy, right? But really, this is something literally no one wanted to see. It's not a single fucking person who saw the relationship between Han Solo and Princess Leia and thought, oh boy, can't wait for this to turn into a disaster. I can't wait for them to have a bitter breakup. And I get that, you know, sequels and prequels and all of that shouldn't be exclusively based on what fans want. Oftentimes, what the fans want isn't the best course of action, and movie makers can in fact introduce things the fans didn't know they wanted. They can introduce things the fans didn't think of that are actually really cool, and the fans would actually be really, really excited about that introduction, but this clearly isn't it. This is just shitty. There's not a single... I'd like to know who looked at the state Han Solo and Princess Leia was in and thought, this was a good idea. I'm glad they went with this direction as opposed to them being together. I really would like to know who thought that. Other than, of course, J.J. Abrams, who has shown he is not fit to handle the Star Wars universe. And Leia, yeah, her progression was a little bit more sensical than Han Solo, but she didn't really do much in any of these new movies. Like, she's more like C-3PO. She's just sort of there. She's this general or high-ranking member of the Resistance, whatever the fuck they're actually resisting. But she has no political control. She can't call allies on a whim. She's just kind of meandering about, waiting for Han Solo to return practically. And then in episode 8, they realized they needed to do something more with Leia, so they had her do this Superman fly through space, despite her showing like no prowess with the Force at that level. In fact, we've never seen anyone use the Force at that level in the movies. She just pulled a fucking Rey, you know, grabbing these ultra abilities out of her ass just because the plot calls for it. And it just ended up looking really, really dumb. And the real unfortunate thing is that, like, now that her actress is dead, there's not really anything they can do with her other than what might have been written and recorded before episode 9, before Carrie Fisher died. But I don't think anything they recorded then would, like, unfuck the severe travesty of these sequels. Darth Vader might be the most immediately recognizable character of the original trilogy. Luke Skywalker, I would say, is the main character of the original trilogy, and even the main character of Star Wars as a whole. They could make like 9 movies of Rey's shitty adventures through the galaxy. But despite those sequels, despite the prequels, I think it will always be Luke Skywalker who remains like the de facto protagonist for Star Wars. But as far as recognizability goes, I do think that goes to Darth Vader. He has such an iconic look to him. And he was, thankfully, not actually in the sequels. They've managed to spare him the indignation of being subverted or regressed or anything like that. He's still dead. He's still Anakin Skywalker, Force Ghost, out there somewhere, not shooting trees with lightning or anything. And he may just survive Episode 9 unscathed if luck would have it. His appearances in the Disney movies is relegated solely to Rogue One, that's it. Which actually had some pretty good scenes with him. I actually really like the final scene in that sort of tied Rogue One to Episode 4, where all the rebels were handing the Death Star plans between each other, and Darth Vader was mowing them down. I felt that gave Darth Vader a new sense of intimidation and danger that might have been lost due to the oversaturation he has seen in various Star Wars media. Like, once again, it has been established this is not someone to mess around with. He will do what he must to help the Empire win, and that will cost lives. I also like sort of the desperation of the situation where all these rebels have come to understand that it really is over for them. They really can't do anything more than just pass this information along to the next guy and then accept their fate. But they do it because there's a larger battle going on, and they do want to save the galaxy from this oppressive regime. So, there's a little bit of a break for positivity, not necessarily for the sequels, it's actually a prequel, things considered, but a bit of positivity nonetheless. Now, Darth Vader's role in the sequels was relegated to his mask somehow being recovered from the pyre he was the one he was cremated in at the end of Episode 6. I guess they decided to just haul his body off to a ship somewhere and store it for safekeeping, and then somehow the First Order got hold of it. Whatever. In fact, I'm not even sure if his mask was taken off the second Death Star. When Luke Skywalker removed it and was able to see Anakin's face, did they take his mask with him off the Death Star to Endor, or was it just left behind? I actually legitimately don't remember. But his mask, the representation of him, was in the sequels, and it was sort of there. Kylo Ren wants to be Darth Vader, who's sort of like Babby Darth Vader, cosplaying as him. Kind of looks like almost one of those knockoffs you see that are made to avoid copyright issues, but are close enough that anyone would be able to immediately understand, oh yeah, this is supposed to be this character in everything but name and every last detail. I guess he wasn't the worst treated. The worst treated, let's get right to that. Out of absolutely all these characters, was no doubt Luke Skywalker, who, as I mentioned before, is the main character of Star Wars. I remember going to Rogue One with my parents, actually. This was the first Star Wars film they've seen in a long time. And what my mother asked, actually, after the film was over was, "Where's Luke?" She simply could not comprehend that Luke Skywalker was not in this movie. And despite trying to explain to her, this is a prequel. This takes place before Luke Skywalker went out on his adventures. Yes, he's alive, but he wouldn't be in this movie because he's not doing anything. He's just sort of there on Tatooine, being a farmer boy and nothing more. Despite trying to explain that to her, it never quite... she never grasped it. She still couldn't understand why the hell Luke Skywalker wasn't in this movie. She also couldn't understand why Ellen Ripley wasn't in the Alien prequels, which I guess just comes to show that some characters really have become synonymous with the franchise they're part of. But I think her mindset represents a larger movie-going audience, not sci-fi weenies like me or Star Wars weenies or anything like that, but just casual moviegoers who want to watch a good film and thought, "Oh, Star Wars, this looks good." They wonder where all these characters that they have come to know and love, and despite not being super invested into these movies, they have become well known to them to the point where their absence is recognizable as a fault. Thankfully, she did not see Episode 8, which was the real introduction to Luke Skywalker. He was in Episode 7, yes, for a few silent moments, but Episode 8 was when his story really began, and my fucking goodness, what a travesty it is. You could not bastardize a character quite as much as they've done with Luke Skywalker in Episode 8. This is a character who was supposed to be the hero and optimist of the series. He has started as like a wide-eyed, starry dreamer, wanting to have awesome adventures through the galaxy and save the princess, because that would make him feel good inside and get to play the hero he always wanted to be. And then he sort of does that, actually. He blows up the Death Star, he saves Leia, he helps the rebellion, he learns about the Force, and learns that his father was killed by Darth Vader, and he's able to use the Force and all of that fun stuff. But then Episode 5 rolls around, and he learns about actions and consequences. He learns that he can't just rush off in order to save people, no matter how much he really wants to, even if they're his best friends, even if they're people who have saved him. He needs to realize that he is not the most powerful entity in the galaxy. Episode 5 ends with him losing Han Solo to Boba Fett, who took him back to Jabba the Hutt. He lost one of his hands after an absolute curb stomp battle against Darth Vader, with the Sith Lord or Apprentice winning. And he's done this, he's failed like this because he abandoned his training with Yoda in favor of saving his friends, only to end up losing them. And the worst of it, the absolute worst part of those moments, was finding out that Darth Vader didn't kill his father, but instead Darth Vader was his father. And that absolutely changed his outlook on the state of the galaxy and Jedi and the Sith and all that. I guess you can say, he had a lot of heart in episode 4 and the start of episode 5, but that doesn't excuse him with not using his head. He needs to be a bit more cynical, a bit more hardened, and be able to make the tough decisions. You can't necessarily save everyone, but in these tough decisions, you might be able to save most people, even at the expense of those you might be closest to. And then episode 6 rolls around, and like the gap between episode 4 and 5, Luke Skywalker has become more adept in the Force and the ways of the Jedi. He does extremely well fighting against Jabba the Hutt, all things considered. Though I guess he was technically initially captured, he was able to really turn that around a lot better than he was able to with, say, the Sand People from episode 4 or Darth Vader from episode 5. And then he goes on to confront the Emperor and Darth Vader, and by this point, knowing that Darth Vader is his dad, he's no longer invested in striking down Vader and taking revenge for killing his father, or just defeating Vader in combat and basking in any glory. He wants to redeem Vader. He wants Vader to come back to the light. If Darth Vader's like the guy Obi-Wan Kenobi knew, if Darth Vader is really supposed to be his dad, then he wants Darth Vader to defy everything that he has come to know and experienced under the Empire and become a good guy again. And that's a real fucking challenge, considering that Darth Vader didn't bat an eye when an entire planet was destroyed. Darth Vader might be one of the most evil people in the galaxy, second to the Emperor himself by that point, and yet Luke Skywalker, having that connection with Vader, believes in his heart of hearts that Vader can be redeemed. Not necessarily at the expense of the larger picture. He's still trying to defeat the Emperor. He didn't rush off to save Vader immediately after episode 5, but took his time to improve his skill, and he didn't let his emotions get the better of him when he did defeat Vader in that lightsaber battle. So he was able to think much better than he was in episode 5, but he's still that good person from episode 4 who wanted to help the galaxy and make things better. And this is all very important to understand, because according to episode 8, we're finally getting back to the sequels, much to the dismay of some viewers, I'm sure. According to episode 8, Luke Skywalker tried training a new generation of Jedi, and it failed spectacularly. Kylo Ren ended up betraying him and killing everyone and burning down his Jedi temple. And the reason it failed was because Luke Skywalker sensed some darkness in Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren being the child of Han Solo and Leia. And when he sensed some darkness, his immediate thought as to how to handle a situation was, I should go over with a lightsaber and stab this 10-year-old kid. And that's such a jarring difference between what he was like in all the other movies and what he's like in even before episode 8. And such a difference in character deserves a lot more screen time than like a minute or two of flashback sequence. They have essentially taken the major qualities of Luke Skywalker and undone them for the sake of a quick explanation as to why Kylo Ren's such an asshole. But the very fact that he would even think for a second, oh, this kid's experiencing the dark side a little bit, kinda like my dad. I should murder him. I should murder the son of my best friend in the whole galaxy and my sister. I should murder this young child because he might falter in his path to being a Jedi. Sort of like how I almost faltered in my path to being a Jedi in episode 5 and 6. It's just an absolute bastardization, and it gets worse when the rest of his appearance in episode 8 was him being this grouchy old hermit who didn't want to protect the galaxy. He didn't want to right any wrongs. He didn't want to stop the dark side. He just wanted to hole off in this shitty little island surrounded by porgs. And that's that. It's something that needed an entire movie at least to depict. You can't just have that big of a change in character in such a short amount of time and for it to be satisfying. Does it explain why Luke Skywalker is a grouchy hermit? Yeah. Does it explain why Kylo Ren is an asshole? Yeah. Is it good? Is it satisfying? Was it well done? No. It's the most bare bones, absolutely utilitarian and nothing more way to explain some of the changes in the galaxy that could have possibly been done, and it's been done at the expense of one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. And unfortunately, that's that. It's canon. It's not going away. If you ever watch episode 4, 5, or 6 again, you'll be sitting there understanding that after these adventures, after he saves the day, after he stops the Empire and grows so much as a character, you'll become this isolationist asshole. After Han Solo goes from a self-centered lowlife to a hero of the rebellion, he'll go back to a self-centered lowlife. Leia's gonna go back to this, pretty much faceless politician, but she'll also sometimes Superman fly, I guess. R2-D2 and C-3PO aren't gonna do shit. Chewbacca isn't gonna do a damn thing. Darth Vader is gonna become the icon for some whiny little bitch. The original trilogy will always be a good series of movies, but watching them, the experience of watching them, I think will forever be tainted by the absolute crap that these new movies are. And with episode 9 eventually coming out, I'm curious about how they would unfuck the absolute disaster that was episode 8. But at the same time, I don't hold much hope for them, especially since episode 7 wasn't that good either. Episode 7 set up most, I would say, of the problems I have depicted or have talked about in this little ramble here. Lando's gonna be in episode 9 from what I hear. They've already kind of screwed him up. Now he'll stick his dick in absolutely everything, including some shitty robot rights activist or some crap like that. But is he gonna die in episode 9, considering the survivability track record of all these original trilogy characters? Is Chewbacca gonna die in a real crappy way? They might even kill off R2-D2 and C-3PO for all we know. Like, these characters who have endured every battle throughout the whole history of the Star Wars movies might just meet their fate in Episode 9, and it might end up being really shitty and undeserving. Anyways, this has been just a bit of a ramble and rant about the absolute state of Star Wars in 2019. I hope you enjoyed this silly little video and I gave you a little bit to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.
I'm moving this. Victor. That air wasn't getting any lighter.